let's go to Monday night. Eagles at the Seahawks. Both teams are reeling right now. Eagles favored by 4 on the road. That seems a little shaky. Total 48. Luck rankings. Eagles, number 1. Seattle, number 19. So Seattle's been a little bit less lucky than average, where the Eagles have been the luckiest team in the National Football League. And I talked about this last week. Their point differential heading into that Dallas game, they were 10-2, and their point differential suggested they should have been 7-5 heading into that Dallas game. And it's kind of, still the same deal here. So this is one where the Eagles are favored. But I mean, any thoughts on this? Is the second best luck ranking play of the week. So any thoughts on, could this be a spot where, maybe the Eagles sputter yet again, and it's not just, their favorite and they can run it like you'd expect?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, the luck rankings love fading the Eagles, and that has been very profitable the past few weeks. Both of these teams have had just brutal schedules the past month or so, which is why they've been struggling. So, yeah, you'd expect the Eagles to get it together here and, beat the Seahawks, but the Seahawks are fighting for their lives as well. I guess the question is, who the hell is starting quarterback for the Seahawks, and does it matter?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. But if Drew Lock is announced as starter, does this go up towards 5? I don't think it'll hit 6.
It will definitely move up. It's probably the market, I would say, would probably give him maybe a point and a half. But it's probably less than that.
Yeah, and if Geno's announced as a starter, I mean, it won't go down too much, right? It's not going to go.
Probably go 3.
You think it'll go to 3?
Yeah.
As
bad as the Eagles were favored. I mean, the Eagles were dogs at home by more than 3 to the Niners, and they were dogs, and the Cowboys were more than 3. So at Seattle, after playing this badly, I think it would go to 3, maybe 3.5, maybe 3.5.
Well, yeah, it's at 3.5 now at some spots.
That's it. Yeah, 4. I've seen most before, but
I'm just saying,
they would definitely go to 3. I think.
So if you like the Seahawks, even if Drew Lock starts, now is the time to lock him in, right? Is that what kind of we're getting at?
Yeah, and just for DFS purposes, I'm just saying, I think when you see Eagles favored, which because they've been coming off some brutal game scripts and losses, when a lot of people kind of look, they look to these Vegas lines to inform their lineup decision, and they say, okay, well, finally, after a rough stretch, you mentioned it, brutal schedule, the Eagles are favored again. And I'm just saying, just think about the alternatives, because this is a spot where it could be a get right for the Seahawks, because the Eagles defense is bad.
Absolutely. No, I think I'm tempted to lock in the Seahawks plus 3.5 right now.
I'm kind of talking myself into it too, yeah.
No, because what people do is also they see, they're favored by 3.5, so they'll probably win. Looking outside of the context of the matchup, and it's no. This just means that the chances of the Seahawks just winning the game and having a leading game script is probably more likely than people think. Is kind of what you're getting at too. So yeah, I love it. Does that mean we're playing some Charbonnet, some Kenneth Walker here? Is that
I think both of those guys, especially because they're splitting snaps to an extent. I mean, Walker is clearly the lead guy. They just love Walker. But I think especially with last week, the way it broke down, Walker, they have their usual roles, but because the Seahawks always get in the third down and Walker plays mostly early downs, it's just almost reversed, because they just didn't have a lot of early downs. And then Charbonnet ended up carrying the ball more on his snaps than Walker did. So the whole usage is backwards. So yeah, I think Walker's a nice kind of somewhat contrarian play against a tough Eagles defense, because you could have a leading Seahawks game script. I mean, all they have to do is get one of those let DK Metcalf run away from somebody again. So a lot of ways to go in this one. Where are you going in the cap spot?
Well, after saying all that, I'm going to go with DeAndre Swift. The Eagle. I love the idea of a Kenneth Walker captain play. Don't get me going here, but let's go the safe route here. I think DeAndre Swift could be under the radar too. I think there's a lot of players we can consider here. But just given the fact that the Eagles have been blown out 2 straight games, I think they do want to lean on DeAndre Swift here. And blowout game scripts aren't ideal for DeAndre Swift. Those are perfect for Kenny Gainwell. So I think Swift specifically could get back on track here. And Seattle's run defense has been trending down lately. You know, they were really good earlier in the season. Lately, not so much. They gave up 2 big games to Christian McCaffrey. Can't really fault them for that. But they did allow, Tony Pollard, Brian Robinson, Royce Freeman, Keaton Mitchell to all have, pretty good games. So DeAndre Swift could have a nice bounce back game here. And you saw that, like, in the second half, I think when the Eagles were down by, like, 14 points, I had DeAndre Swift under 13.5 rush attempts, and they just fed him the ball that drive, down 14. So it's like they wanted to get back to that. It was too late, obviously, but I think out of the gate here, I think they are going to lean on Swift and the run game, try to control the game. So I do like him here. And if he does score a touchdown, it's always tough because Jalen Hurts is going to get those tush-push 1-yard runs. But if he does get a touchdown, that's nice leverage over Jalen, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. So he's a little bit more of a long shot in the captain slot, but I do think that the Eagles will at least try early on to just go through DeAndre Swift as much as they can.
Yeah, because it does ironically go against like what we were talking about with
that's what I'm
opposite
saying.
game script. Yeah. But I also but the reason I can get on board with it is because you're not only thinking about like not everyone. There's thousands of entrances that are entering most tournaments, at least hundreds, if not thousands. And not everyone's just going by the Vegas lines. A lot of people are also just going by, recent production. And from that standpoint, I think a lot of people will shy away from DeAndre Swift because he just hasn't been as productive as of late, because, like you said, because of those blowups. And, people like certainty. They like to see a guy with, game logs that look good, and, especially when you're going to pay 1.5x for that player and you're investing real money into doing so. So I could definitely get on it from that standpoint, coming off 2 straight duds and 3 pretty quiet games in a row. Last time he scored a touchdown was that Chiefs game, which was 4 games ago now. So I have some interesting kind of contrarian thoughts on his backfield, which I'll get to in the next segment. But for my captain, this is a little bit more obvious now, DK Metcalf. But anytime I could get a receiver like this in a slate like this, where there's other expensive options, so like the ownership's still going to be split because there's AJ Brown, there's Devontae Smith, Tyler Lockett had a big game. The quarterback, Jalen Hurts, is going to take up a lot of captaincy as well. So DK Metcalf, you could still get him at a fair rostership, especially in the captain spot. And Philly allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers. Check this. A wide receiver against Philadelphia, at least one, has scored at least 16 PPR points in every single game. Every single game. Now, in terms of number 1 receivers, which DK Metcalf is, every number 1 receiver that went against Philly topped 16 PPR points, except Rashee Rice in week 11, which, but we know he only plays like 60% of the snaps. So he's not a true number 1, or at least he wasn't back in week 11. So you could kind of give him a pass for that. And in that same game, you had Justin Watson, who kind of was the Chiefs' de facto number 1 until Rice started playing more snaps. He went for 5 catches, 53 yards, and a touchdown on 11 targets, which I'm pretty sure is one of his best, if not his best game this year as a Chief. And Philadelphia has been struggling with those big physical wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb, 6 for 71 and a touchdown. And in the other game, 11 for 191. Deebo Samuel, 4 for 116 and 2 scores. Gabe Davis, 6 for 105 and a touchdown. Mentioned Watson, 5 for 53 and a touchdown. And that was only in the last 5 games. Like it would take all day if I listed off every alpha wide receiver or big physical guy that has put up numbers against this Eagle defense. Bradbury is their their biggest corner, 6'1", 210. His 54.5 PFF coverage grade is 96th out of 119 qualifiers. And DK loves playing Philly. Last two meetings with Philly, 10 catches, 177 in November of 2020. And then in the game before that against Philly, it was back in, it was early 2020. It was 2019 wild card game, 7 for 160 and a touchdown. So he's 160 or more yards in each of his last two against Philly. I don't know if that means anything, but it does mean that he definitely gets up to play Philly. And everything's in place for him to put up a monster game yet again. Who you like for value?
Yeah, I like Dallas Goedert here. He returned to action last week and had a ton of playing time. His route participation rate was just over 90%. Only caught 4 balls for 30 yards, but we could see a big game from him anytime now with that kind of playing time. And Seattle's been beatable by opposing tight ends. Since week 8, every tight end's exceeded expectations against them except for George Kittle back in week 12. But, he returned the favor last week. So they've been pretty shaky against tight ends. Like you said, like a lot of people are going to be on A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. I'm assuming Goddard as well. But there's at least enough guys to spread things out. I think Goddard is pretty sneaky here, though.
Yeah, I like Goddard in – I'm high. I just like him this week, period. I think, you talk about kind of feeding Swift to kind of get back to what they are doing. I think, to me, the issue with the Eagles offense is not just that, like, they're not committed to establishing a run. Remember, this team was surprisingly pass heavy early in games, kind of like Dallas is now. And that's really how they had a lot of success. So I think, getting Jalen Hurts kind of that security blanket, letting because Smith and Brown do great work down the field. And, sometimes you get those screen passes to Smith, but they're getting predictable. But Goddard is a guy who gives you that yard after catch. And Jalen Hurts doesn't have to stand there and read the defense forever. And, just get it out to him, let him do some work, kind of like the Chiefs do with Kelsey. Goddard has that skill set. So I think he's another one of those guys that when they say, hey, we got to kind of get right and get back to what we do, I think Goddard is really a key to unlocking that. So I love him as well. I'm going to go with Jackson Smith and Jigba here. Came off a disappointing week last week in a game where, Drew Lock exceeded expectations and was fairly efficient throwing the football against a stout 49er defense. But it was, Metcalf got a touchdown. It was a lot of Tyler Lockett. So, it kind of ebbs and flows with these things. So I think this is a good JSN spot in addition to Metcalf. JSN with 48 or more receiving yards or a touchdown in 6 of his last 9 games. He's averaging over 4 catches and just under 50 yards over his last 9 with a couple of touchdowns. And, talked about this in our player projection pod, but the Philly slot defense is struggling. Bradley Roby's been the guy they've been putting out there lately. He grades out 86th out of 119 at PFF. They just really haven't found somebody that to replace Avonte Maddox. So JSN, 70% slot receiver who can go deep as well, I think this is a spot where I think he could have a big game, kind of like he had it was on the verge of a couple Thursdays ago if their refs had given him that touchdown right before the half. And then, of course, it went to Metcalf, and his stat line just got bigger. But I think there's a JSN monster game incoming, and this is certainly the defense for it. And, Drew Lock showed last week that he's not going to be a major downgrade to the point where they can't put up numbers. Also, partly it's just because Geno's struggled for a lot this year and dealing with some injuries. So no matter who's the quarterback, like the Seattle passing game, like JSN in the mid-range. Who do you like for dart throws?
I like Noah Fant here, and this is another tricky 3-way committee in Seattle here with their tight ends. And Colby Parkinson was the one who had the better fantasy game last week, thanks to his touchdown. But Fant is still the clear lead tight end for the Seahawks, at least in terms of playing time. He's typically seeing around 60% routes run rate the last 5 games. And Seattle doesn't use tight ends too much since they now have a solid wide receiver 3 in Jackson Smith and Jigba. But, Fant does see enough playing time to potentially hit on a 1-game slate. Philly ranks 32nd DVOA against tight ends still. And assuming I would prefer if Drew Lock starts this game for Noah Fant because he targeted tight ends at a much higher rate than Geno Smith. Last week, he targeted tight ends. They had 7 total targets combined, which is the most since week 3. And Drew Lock played with Noah Fant in Denver, so they already have some pretty good chemistry. So I think this could be a sneaky spot for Noah Fant.
Oh yeah, every DFS league is a sneaky spot for Noah Fant because he's usually never going to catch more than like 2-3 balls, but every once in a while, those 2-3 catches are going to go for like 80 yards and a touchdown because he has he has decent athleticism. He has run after the catch ability, and he's never going to be a defensive priority. So Noah Fant is a guy that he's probably one of my most rostered players anytime the Seahawks have a have a primetime showdown slate because I think he's perfect and no one's ever really thinking about. Remember when he used to have hype because he was like in that same conversation with who was he? Who was in his draft class? It wasn't Kittle, right? It was after that. I forget who it was, but yeah, Noah Fant, like high hopes for him, and he kind of
he replaced Kittle at Iowa, and then Laporta replaced him. But yeah, what was that? I mean, he was traded for Russell Wilson. He was part of that deal.
Yep.
He's still pretty young. I mean, it's not like unheard of for a tight in this current scheme. He's not going to be like a tight end 1, but it wouldn't surprise me if he pops up down the road as a tight end 1 again.
Hawkinson. It was him and Hawkinson. Those. And like Hawkinson kind of took off and
2019 draft.
Yep. And left Noah Fant in the dust a little bit. So
yeah.
But yeah, I like it, and his snap rate has actually been slightly increasing. They've played, and maybe it's because of all these trailing game scripts, but they've been playing Will Dissly a little bit less. This was more of your traditional tight end, better blocker and whatnot. So it's another one of those games where you would think Fant would continue being out there a little bit more than usual. But yeah, I mentioned, I have some thoughts about the Eagle backfield, and this is more of kind of like a way to attack tournaments and a theory I have. But Kenneth Gainwell, I think, is very intriguing because DeAndre Swift on this last carry, you mentioned it, they tried to feed him late in that Cowboy game. His last carry set a new career high for touches. So this is the most touches he's ever had in a season. And remember early, when Swift first took over, every week it seemed like he was just super efficient. He had, his first start, over 6 yards a carry, then 8 yards a carry. His next one, he was 4 yards a carry or better in 5 of his first 6 starts. Not counting that week 1 game where he only had 1 carry. But and then these last 6 games, he's been held to 3.6 yards per carry or less in 4 of the last 6. And he could be wearing down just a bit. So this might be a time where they actually turn to Kenneth Gainwell. And there's precedent for this. Miles Sanders, remember last year, was kind of having a career year just like Swift. And post-Thanksgiving, the Eagles just started to work Gainwell more and more into their offense, for that stretch run. In the first 10 games pre-Thanksgiving last year, Gainwell averaged 18 snaps and 4 touches a game, just 13 yards per game. And then after Thanksgiving, which spanned 10 games because they got all the way to the Super Bowl, his snaps went from 18 to 25. His touches nearly doubled from 3.9 to 7.7. And his yardage quadrupled from 13 yards a game to 47 yards a game. So I think they might, when they do their soul searching, they might say, hey, this worked for us last year to not overdo it with our, top, speedy, explosive back. Last year it was Sanders. This year is Swift. Let's start working Gainwell in. And remember, he was working in the red zone. He was getting touchdowns. He was catching it. He was running it. So I think you might see something similar this year down the stretch to keep Swift fresh, because they still have 10 wins. They're gonna make the playoffs, and they're gonna need Swift there.
Yeah.
So I'm actually looking, not even just this slate, but they got the Giants a couple of times. Like they have some matchups, Cardinals, where I think you might see a similar thing to what happened last year with Kenneth Gainwell season kind of taking over for this stretch run. So I want to get ahead of that this week, not just so I like Gainwell, not just because I think the Eagles may actually struggle in this spot more than the market does, but because I actually think Gainwell may start to be used more on early downs and in the red zone, a la last season. So that's why I like me some Kenny Gainwell this week.
Yeah, and it's not like it'd be new for them. Week 1 he was the workhorse back,
exactly.
And then he got hurt, and then Swift took over. So there's precedent for this. Don't forget about the ultimate vulture though, Boston Scott. His usage, Boston Scott's usage is picking up. He has no touchdowns this year, so we might be due for a Boston Scott vulture touchdown too.
Unless they do Rashad Penny a solid and make him active as a third back in his revenge spot.
Oh, revenge game. Yeah.
I'm actually going to project, because this game's a Monday. I'm actually going to project Penny for like a half a carry just in case.
Just to have him registered.
Yeah, because you can't re-rank him Monday, for the so but that is something to monitor, because Penny's obviously in the doghouse or behind all those guys, but this is the team that let him walk for cheap after he had a really good run with them and was productive. So I wouldn't I think the Eagles are they're trying to get their swag back too. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see things like Penny active, getting that Super Bowl swag like what they do last year. Gainwell getting more carries. Maybe they go back to that 3-way with Scott and Gainwell. I also wouldn't be surprised, before we get out of here, I also wouldn't be surprised if they reactivate Albert Okwuegbunam, because he actually had a decent, some decent receiving games while Goddard was out. And I don't know if they're really getting, their passing game has been shaky. So maybe they want to go for a pass catching tight end instead of the ghost of Julio Jones. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they scratch one of those receivers like Zacchaeus or Jones and go, and maybe they try to go more heavy personnel and get another tight end out there. So a lot of just be aware for some changes from the Eagles. And this is what I'm talking about, where you got to just kind of understanding when to look at and say, okay, there might be some variance here, because the Eagles have been fairly consistent in how they use players, but it hasn't been working for them. Like Hurts hasn't been spreading the ball around enough. They might be overusing Swift at this point. So I'm looking for some changes this week. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, that is going to do it for us here on the night shift. Be sure to check out the full list of luck rankings, actionnetwork.com for those. And of course, all of our NFL fantasy and betting content, fantasylabs.com for our DFS tools and models. Don't forget to check out that player projections episode out right now over on the Action Network podcast channel. Our fantasy preview episode for week 15 that breaks down the main slate right here on the Fantasy Flex channel. Don't forget that Action Discord server as well. The link will be in the episode description. Sean's on X at @_oddsmaker. I'm at Chris Raybon, and we're at those same handles on the free award-winning Action Network app. Until next time, let's get this money.